Business is made possible by our partners, Solar Dynamics, the most efficient energy systems.
4 months after the people of Guyana went to the polls on March 2nd, a declaration of the winner of those elections is still being hotly disputed. And this week on the People's Business, we focus on the results of the disputed election results in Guyana with some very special guests. There are Anil Nandlall of the PPP Civic Party and former Attorney General of Guyana. Mr. Nandlall, welcome.
Good evening, and good evening to your viewers and listeners, and thank you for accommodating me in your program.
No problem. We also have Mr. Gerald Perreira. He's political leader of the Organization for the Victory of the People.
Thank you. Thank you for having me in your program, and greetings to the viewers and listeners across the Caribbean.
We also have Captain Gerald Gouveia, head of the Private Sector Association of Guyana.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay, and finally, but by no means least, Barbadian pollster Peter Wickham.
Thank you. Good to be with you again, Peter.
Okay, I also want to let you know that we reached out to the ruling APNU-AFC party, but they declined to send a representative. We'll be back with the People's Business Live in just a moment. Welcome back to the People's Business Live as we discuss the disputed Guyana election results. And before I introduce or go to the panel, I want to let you hear an extract from the editor-in-chief of Starbuck News, Anand Prasad, giving his position on the state of play in Guyana.
The situation in Guyana, of course, is that we're waiting on a key decision on Wednesday by the Caribbean Court of Justice. Now, that decision is a result of an appeal from a Guyana Court of Appeal decision to the CCJ about the insertion of the word valid in an article of the Constitution. Now, the import of the insertion of that word valid, it is that it allowed the chief election officer to then make the assumption that he can then decide what are valid from invalid votes. And this has resulted in him canning more than 115,000 votes from the people who cast ballots on March 2nd.
So there you have the editor-in-chief of Starbuck News, Anand Prasad. Gentlemen, awaiting the CCJ position on Wednesday, but How did we really get here 4 months on? I'll throw it first to Mr. Nandlall.
Well, it is significant that you are having this discussion with us on the eve of CARICOM Day, and we are speaking to the Caribbean people. And let me concede and confess how embarrassed I am as a Guyanese to be speaking about my country's affairs on the eve of CARICOM Day. After some 60 odd years of independence, we still have been unable to manage our affairs as an independent people, and we still depend upon foreign countries and the international organizations to come into our country to settle our disputes. And what are the disputes? The disputes have been manufactured. We went to an elections on March the 2nd. The government of the day, for a few weeks after the elections, claimed that they won the elections. One of the returning officers, or 9 of the 10 regions, the results were tabulated without any controversy. When the result for the main region in the country, the most populous region in the country, was being tabulated, a gentleman who performs the role of the returning officer, Claremont Mingo, attempted to use a spreadsheet and not the statements of poll as the basis for the declaration of the results. We went to court, the court set aside that declaration, then he came back and he did the identical thing and made another fraudulent declaration. That resulted in an intervention at the level of CARICOM, which culminated in a decision to do a recount of all the ballots. We did that recount supervised by CARICOM as per a gazetted order made under the law, and that recount was concluded. It was observed by CARICOM team and other teams, including local observer missions here, the diplomatic community. The result, the count itself, the recount was done by GCOM itself, headed by the Chief Elections Officer. He personally tabulated the results, and then when he was requested to prepare the statutory form, which ought to incorporate the recount results, and that should be the basis for the declaration of the final results, he took what he claimed is guidance from the Court of Appeal in a case that was recently filed, which is now at the CCJ, and he arrogated unto himself. First of all, he read that he had an authority from that decision. The decision made no direction to anyone. There was no coercive order made, no mandatory order made, simply a declaration that votes mean valid votes in the Constitution, as if votes meant anything else other than valid votes. He used that interpretation put up by the Court of Appeal and arrogated unto himself some tremendous repertoire of powers and proceeded to invalidate 115,000 votes based upon allegations made by one side that dead and migrated people voted at elections. Allegations that were untested, unproven. No one was afforded a hearing, no type of investigation done whatsoever. Yet he formed the view that all these allegations are correct. He arrogated unto himself this power. He discounted 115,000 votes, giving the wrong party, the governing party, a victory when they lost the elections by some 15,000 votes. Now we are at the Caribbean Court of Justice. They hopefully will upset or overrule the Court of Appeals ruling. Perhaps they will vacate the perverse report presented by the Chief Elections Officer, and the matter will go back to GCOM for another direction to be given to the Chief Elections Officer for him to declare the correct results. Hopefully, to the letter now that they will send him, they will attach the documents that he must use and the actual totals which he must use to form the basis of that report, which he has to present. Once that report is presented, then the results will be declared based upon that report, because that is what the law mandates to be done.
Okay, just what your thoughts, Mr. Nandlall. I'm going to hear from the political leader of the Organization for the Victory of the People, Mr. Gerald Perreira. Mr. Perreira, what's your interpretation of what has happened so far?
Okay, well, first of all, before I get into that, it's important to understand where the OVP is coming from, because the Organization for the Victory of the People is an ideologically driven political formation. And we are basically a democratic socialist Pan-African formation that is committed to completing the national liberation struggle in Guyana in order to achieve economic justice and true independence in our life. We contested the elections in 2015 and in 2020 at the regional level, Region 4. We urge the electorate to give the presidential vote at the general election level to the APNU-AFC, but not to put what we call to put all their eggs in one basket and to give us the regional vote. Why did we contest elections, and why did we ask for voters to vote APNU-AFC? First, we have serious ideological and political differences with the existing liberal democratic arrangement in Guyana. We are witnessing the flaws and the limitations of it. And elections always boil down in Guyana to fundamentally, it becomes an ethnic contest with political competition between two entrenched garrisons, the PPP and the PNCR, that is a major component of a partnership for national unity. Now, the reason we contested at the regional level is we did not want to split the votes. So we offered critical support to APNU. Why? Because during the more than 20 years of when the PPP was in office, there was corruption on a large scale, there was extrajudicial killings and what have you. So we offered critical support to APNU. Not that we agreed with their economic policies or their philosophy, because at the end of the day, what Guyanese and people in the region need to understand is that both parties are no longer the parties of their respective founder leaders.
But not
yes, I'm
in
answer the
you,
question.
Answer
yes,
the question in terms of the perspective at this time, in terms of the state of play. You're giving the history.
Yeah, what I'm saying is this, you see, this is important because the two parties have all accepted, right, the neoliberal economic model. Mr. Nandlall said that after 60 years, we still have outside forces and agencies telling us have to come and see how we done it. It was the PPP under Chedi Jagan that went and solicited help from the Carter Center.
Mr. Moderator, could this gentleman be directed to answer the question?
Okay.
I will.
Go ahead, just.
I will not be bamboozled, Anil. It was
Chedi
Jagan that asked the Carter Center to come into Guyana. We criticized, in the 2015 elections, we criticized the role of the then U.S. Charge d'Affaires, Brian Hunt, in meddling in our affairs. We objected to the International Republic.
No problem, Mr. Perreira, but how do you view the state of play at this moment in terms of the disputed results?
We are coming to that. In the elections, when
the program is on your hour.
Yep. When they started the count, when the counting started, Claremont Mingo, the returning officer for Region 4, stopped the count and then said the count will resume the next day. All the political parties were there, the count was delayed, and it was never resumed. And then Mingo made a declaration that the APNU-AFC won the elections. What Mingo did is when he stopped the count, he had given the Organization for the Victory of the People 125 votes and posted it on GCOM's website. The recount that was done at the Artichon Convention Center showed that we got officially the valid votes 448 votes. So mingle.
But at the macro level with the PPP Civic and with the APNU-AFC, how do you view what has transpired?
Well, I agree with the CARICOM observers that what we witnessed it, we were there in the recount, we accept the recount as valid. We accept the recount as valid.
Okay, and let me hear from Pollster. I'll come back to you. Let me hear from Pollster Peter Wickham. I'll come back to you, Mr. Perreira. Let me hear from Pollster Peter Wickham.
Part of the problem. Yeah, no, part of my co-panelists, part of the problem is with this situation is that whenever we get into conversations about the Guyana situation, I find now there are always a lot of people that say, before we do anything, we have to understand the history and the context, you know, and they start telling, they either go along a line that Mr. Perreira has gone down, or alternatively, they go down the line of explaining the whole racial reality of Guyana to me. To me, all of this is, with due respect, sir, it's not really relevant to the conversation that we're having. Look, we have an election that took place based on certain rules that have been established. These have been rules that have operated regarding elections for a long time. They basically determine that the person that got the most votes, or the party that got the most votes, wins. It's a very simple arithmetical situation to come to. What has happened in Guyana is unprecedented. I tried to imagine, and I said this in a conversation this week, if the returning officer in Barbados took leave of his senses to decide, I have a count here that shows that one party won, but I'm telling you that based on my own observations, ignore the fact that my scrutineers certify validity of so many votes. I personally think that what we have is another situation, right? I guarantee you, no sooner than those words fell from his lips, he would be taken off to the psychiatric hospital in one of the white vans that will be waiting outside. It's not something that would be tolerated in any other Caribbean country. But yet still we have a situation here that 3 months after, you have a returning officer and a chief elections officer that are resolutely refusing to declare a particular result. I'm fascinated that it is happening. I'm appalled at the same time. I think it is a disturbing breach of certain democratic principles that we have all lived by. And I am concerned and also embarrassed for Guyana, a country that I love very much. I'm not sure where he is getting this power from to decide unilaterally that he can determine what validity is. And I feel honored to be sitting on a panel with Mr. Nandlall, because I have found his legal analysis of the whole thing quite refreshing and quite clear. The constitutions, the legal infrastructure that is set up for elections would naturally assume that validity is a part of the vote being there. And my understanding is that if it is not a spoiled vote, it is a valid vote. And it is a valid vote because they're assumed to be valid. So quite frankly, whether the CCJ comes back and sets aside the decision regarding whether they had jurisdiction, which is what I think that they will do, or not, in the final analysis, this whole idea that the insertion of the word valid, which is an obvious thing, gives a returning officer the ability to determine validity based on his own personal judgment and not on the judgment of all of the other electoral officers that would have been involved in the process is appalling. And I think really the conversation will have to go in the next week, when the CCJ comes back, is what are the legal mechanisms that would allow you to either suspend or dismiss, or alternatively criminally charge and lock up the chief electoral officer for what he has been doing. Because I think it is fairly clear to me that he has no intention of making a declaration other than the one that he has made. And even if the CCJ comes back and says that the jurisdictional issue was not clear and that the appeal court didn't have a jurisdiction and they revert to it, he's still going to be of the mind that, look, ultimately I have the power to make a declaration. The commission cannot declare anything regarding this election until I make that declaration, and he will make a declaration that the APNU has won. And it's disturbing that you have a whole political institution behind him. For example, the APNU-AFC, and I don't see anyone in that organization as saying, but stick a pin. If you made this declaration and you try to swear in Granger, how can President Granger possibly operate as president after all of this? He has no legitimacy locally. He has no legitimacy regionally. He has no legitimacy internationally. But yet still he would attempt to try to govern a country. It would be disastrous. And that is a cause for concern for me. So the situation is unprecedented. I think it is embarrassing. I agree. I think it is unfortunate. And I really do wish you guys well over the next week, because I don't know where this is going.
Okay, thanks, Peter. I'm going to go to Gerald Gouveia, who is the head of the Private Sector Association of Guyana. Your take, sir.
Well, I'm the chairman of the Private Sector Commission of Guyana. And the Private Sector Commission is the apex organization of all of the private sector of Guyana. And we actually field and hosted observer team during the elections itself. We had 700 local observers deployed across the country. So we observed alongside the CARICOM observer team during the March 2nd election. And then we also we had observers in the recount stations at every station throughout the process. And it was, I want to tell you that these elections was probably one of the most well organized. It was transparent, it was fair, it was free, and it was credible. And everything was going absolutely perfect until we got to the regional count of Region 4. And you heard what Mr. Mingo did. It was atrocious. It was the most transparent. It was brutal. It was disrespectful to have a person attempt to steal an election in front of the entire world. They were streaming cell phones. There were all of the international diplomats there. There were all of the international observer teams. And I want to tell you, Guyana is not yet ready not to have CARICOM and the international observers. We, from the private sector, we appreciate every single foreign observer that was present in Guyana that was able to, in a very real way, confirm what we are saying, that the elections were fair and free. And what we saw was the most brutal and disrespectful assault on democracy in this region. And I cannot start telling you how appreciative we are of Barbados and the Barbados Prime Minister and Raul Gonzalez, and of standing up for democracy in Guyana. We are actually very, very concerned in the private sector because our economy is in trouble, not compounded by the COVID-19 measures that have to be put in place. Certainly, it is being destroyed by this political illegality that is engulfing our nation at the moment. And we appreciate very, very much the work of CARICOM, the fact that CARICOM is standing with the Guyanese people in the preservation and protection of democracy. We are very, very concerned about what will happen in the next few days.
Okay, just all your thoughts. Thanks, Mr. Gouveia. And we'll take a short break and we'll be back with the People's Business Live in just a moment. Welcome back to the People's Business Live as we continue to discuss the disputed election results in Guyana. And we were hearing at the end of the session about the involvement of CARICOM in the process. And as you know, Barbados' Prime Minister and immediate past chair of CARICOM, Mayor Amor Motley, has decried attempts to declare the election after the chief elections officer removed over 115,000 votes from the People's Progressive Party civics tally on the grounds that they were fraudulent. Despite the ruling of the Court of Appeal that only valid votes should be used to declare the results, this Motley contains the CARICOM observer team has certified the recount as valid. Let's take that extract.
We must ask, on what grounds and by what form of executive fiat does the Chief Elections Officer determine that he should invalidate one vote, far less over 115,000 votes, when the votes were already certified as valid by the officers of the Guyana Elections Commission in the presence of the said political parties? We must remind all that if there is any evidence of fraudulent or improper conduct, then there is a clear and well-accepted route to deal with these matters. It is through an election petition to an election court.
Okay, you're hearing there from Barbados' Prime Minister, Mayor Amor Motley. I want to know, though, in terms of the state of play at the moment, you've gone through over 4 months now with this. The people of Ghana, do they have immense patience?
I will start with that. Let me also quickly say that listening to Gerry, I get the impression that I may have conveyed the impression that we do not welcome the intervention and the assistance that we have gotten from CARICOM, from the diplomatic community, and in fact from many, many friendly governments around the world. Let me say that we are eternally grateful and we are most happy that they have stood with us and they have condemned the acts against democracy. We welcome that and we continue to rely upon their support and on their guidance in seeing a resolution of this matter. The people of Guyana, in addition to what is going on, they have to deal with a pandemic. You know, the COVID-19 is here, like how it is everywhere else, and patients have been running thin. People are tired. People are frustrated. People are experiencing tremendous mental anguish, and this situation seems to be running on and on. We have had a great deal of difficulty in speaking to our supporters, keeping them off from going off in a particular direction. Although there have been attempts by the APNU to bring people on the streets, we have had to keep our supporters intact and ensure that we speak to them on a regular basis to have patience and await a democratic and civil resolution of this issue. Hopefully, we are nearing the end of that road.
But before you go on, you know, the question that would have to be asked by the Caribbean people is in the appeal before the CTJ by Ghana's opposition leader Barrett Jagdeo and Irfan Ali, the PPP civic presidential candidate. Why do they have to ask the CTJ if it has jurisdiction to hear the appeal when the CCJ, Ghana was one of the first signatories in terms of the original and the appellate jurisdiction for the CCJ?
I'm one of the lawyers appearing in the matter, and there's a live issue before the court, and it may be improper for me to express my view. My view was expressed in the court through our written submissions, but I must use this platform to highlight a most unethical and disgraceful thing which the APNU-AFC are doing throughout the Caribbean. They have placed advertisements, I am told, in Barbados, in the newspapers, in Trinidad, in the newspapers, in which they are presenting their legal arguments that the CCJ has no jurisdiction, knowing full well that that is an issue that is before the court. Clearly, they are carrying their illegal, unethical, disgraceful conduct, which was displayed for the world to see during this electoral process, carrying it out across the Caribbean in their vulgar and indecent attempt to prejudice the outcome of the case. That's what they're doing.
Okay, just what. Hold your thoughts, Mr. Nandlall. Remember, Barbadians, you can call us at 228-5562 or 228-5563. We'll be only too happy to welcome your calls. And I believe we have our first caller for the night. Good evening. You're on the People's Business Live. Good evening. Caller? Okay, I think we might have lost that call. The OAS, they have called for, since mid-June, on the head of the Elections Commission to declare the opposition the winner of the disputed March 2nd elections, and for President David Granger to hand over power to allow the legitimately elected government to take its place. How do you view this call by the OAS?
Who are you talking
Well,
to? Who you wanted to answer?
Mr. Wickham?
Oh, right. No, not only the OAS, I think that position has been taken by pretty much every international organization. Prime Minister Gonzalez made the point that this is a singular moment in terms of the Caribbean, where you find the Americans, the British, the Canadians, the OAS, CARICOM, and the Commonwealth, all standing shoulder to shoulder regarding an issue of democracy. And it's fascinating because you find Ralph Gonzalez, who is very much a lefty, is associating with a position that's being taken by the United States government, the British government, the Canadians. When I talked earlier about the fact that the Guyana government will be isolated unless there's a change of government, it was reflecting that fact that you have all of these agencies that are essentially saying, look, we need to make space. And I think that the PPP civic supporters and certainly the management of that organization has exercised a tremendous amount of restraint. And I think that they should be congratulated for essentially holding back their supporters, who I am sure are anxious to get out on the streets and demonstrate their anger with the fact that the process has taken this long. But yes, certainly, it's a singular moment where the international community is of one mind, and they're standing shoulder to shoulder with the majority of Guyanese who are saying that this needs to be a change of government, and it has to be reflected and reflected very soon.
Okay, I know the other panelists want to react, but we have a call on the line. Good evening, you on the People's Business Live. Good evening. Seems that we might be having a little problem with the calls.
Hello.
Okay, Mr. Perreira, hello, go ahead. We can hear you. Go ahead. Don't listen to your television.
No,
go ahead,
I'm not
please.
listening to television. You can hear me? Can you hear me?
Loud and clear. Yes, make your point or answer question.
Yes, sir. Now, I want to ask the chief officer, when all of this is done, when all of this is finished, the 1,500 votes that he
115,000 votes.
15,000.
Sorry, right. That he diminished.
115,000 votes.
Votes that he diminished, right. Now, if proven, if he were to lose the battle, what would be the outcome of him? And where does his power stop?
Right, he's saying he has done what he has done in accordance with Section 96 of the Representation of the People's Act. We have a lawyer here on the program. I don't know if this is so or not. That's what he's contending.
The Representation of the People Act only authorizes the preparation of a report that reflects the true results generated at the elections. It will never authorize or empower any officer, moreover the chief elections officer, to determine by himself what are valid and what are invalid votes. Moreover, to authorize him to discount and invalidate and do not count ballots. The system, as Dr. Wickham just explained, the system is so structured, the legal process, or the legal electoral process is so structured that it weeds out invalid votes prior to counting. So what is counted is only valid votes. The system puts spoiled and invalid ballots in a different bundle, and that is never recounted at a recount. It's only valid votes that are recounted and can form the basis of tabulation for results. So in terms of what will happen to Lowenfield, 3 sets of private criminal charges have already been filed. in the Georgetown Magistrates Court for fraud at common law, conspiracy to commit fraud, and malfeasance or misfeasance in public office. I suppose more charges are likely to come, but the type of conduct in which Lowenfield has engaged cannot be looked at, cannot be disregarded, or else a future CEO may believe that he can do the same. These are serious
But
criminal offenses that have been
Yeah,
committed.
isn't the
this is
CEO at all times subject to the control of the Ghana Elections Commission?
That's correct, both in the Constitution. Let me read quickly what the Election Laws Amendment Act says. The Chief Election Officer and the Commissioner of Registration in Guyana, they are the same, shall, notwithstanding anything in any written law, be subject to the direction and control of the Commission at all times. The recount order, which the recount was done under, says this: for the avoidance of any doubt, the Chief Elections Officer and every person appointed or authorized to perform any act or functions by virtue of this order are and shall remain subject to the general supervisory power of the Commission. So he is only enjoined and he's bound in law to only comply with the directions given to him by GCOM. And the chairperson in her letter was very explicit. Please tabulate for the purpose of preparation of your report required under Section 69 of the Europa the results generated by the recount. That those are not words capable of ambiguity and
being
ambivalence.
misinterpreted. Yeah. No, I support Mr. Nandlall. Yeah, I support Mr. Nandlall's comments entirely, and I understand that. But I think that this issue is broader. There was a gentleman called Winroth George in St. Kitts and Nevis. He was a supervisor of the election, which is a similar post to the chief elections officer. In 2015, he decided that he was not prepared to make any further announcements. It was about 4 in the morning. And the elections, clearly Labour was losing. He was a Labour supporter. And he said, I'm tired and I am not making any further announcements tonight. And he packed up and he went home. That threw us into a tail. And I say us because I was part of the team that was on the ground there with the media. And, the question is, what do you do in a situation like this? So I am clear in my mind what the laws intend. My concern, however, is that this is the second time in recent history where an election official has decided, you know what, nothing can happen until I make the announcement. And that was what Mr. George was very clear on saying. You know what, if I go home tonight and I don't make any announcement, nobody could be sworn in as Prime Minister. And I will do it when I feel like doing it. It took the intervention of the same Dr. Gonzalez. It took the intervention of Roosevelt Scarrett from Dominica. We also had Keith Mitchell, who was on the line. And essentially all of those leaders jumped onto the radio and jumped onto the phone at 5:30 in the morning and prevailed on Denzel Douglas to concede, and also prevailed on him to prevail on the chief elections officer to make the declarations that needed to be made. And, when people talk about interference of CARICOM, and I'm thinking to myself that was positive interference, because those guys got on the phone and said to Denzel Douglas, look, you're creating a problem here because this guy believes that he is doing good for you by doing that. The challenge that we're having in Guyana now is that it doesn't appear as though the leadership of the PPP Civic is similarly inclined to sit with his colleagues and say, look, what we really need is a concession, and a concession from the PPP would make, for the PNC, would make a huge difference to the outcome of this situation. So I think that, Mr. Nandlall, what we need to see this as a teaching moment, as a teaching opportunity. Our chief elections officers have too much independent power. I know the laws say that they shall be guided, but I think it is fairly clear that they understand that they seem to have powers that say that even though the laws say I should do something, I have a right to decide if I'm going to do it or not. And if I decide not to do it, I can create a constitutional crisis. You remember in Trinidad and Tobago when Henry Robinson, who the laws were very clear, the Constitution said that he shall swear in a minister that is recommended by the Prime Minister. And Henry Robinson said, well, if the laws say I shall do it, it means I have the right not to do it, and I won't. And he didn't. And as a result, Basil Panda's ministers could not be sworn. I think that these are teaching opportunities for us, and we have to realize that there have to be clear mechanisms that would allow for us to discipline a person like him if he decides that he is not going to act as he is instructed, there has to be a route to either dismiss him, suspend him, or as you're saying, through the criminal process to lock him up. Because ultimately he's creating a problem. And as I said, it's not the first time it's happened in the region.
Okay, we're going to take a short break. When we come up, we'll hear from Mr. Perreira and Mr. Gouveia on the People's Business Live. Welcome back to the People's Business Live as we continue to discuss the Guyana election results. And we were having some problems with our phone, but I believe we have got them sorted out. And before we go to Mr. Perreira and Mr. Gouveia, I'm going to take a call. Good evening. You're on the People's Business Live.
Hello.
Hello. Good evening.
Hello. Go ahead. Good evening. My take on this whole election in Guyana is that I wanted to know why did the CARICOM use the word reasonable, credible, and not credible votes. That the election was reasonable, credible, and not credible. That is one. Second, I think an election should, the winner of an election should be, let me put it this way. I think the president of Guyana should be declared a winner on votes that are valid and not valid. Thirdly, it tells me that when the CARICOM personnel says that it is reasonable, credible, it tells me that there were discrepancy in the boxes. So if there were discrepancy in the boxes, why should an election be declared on votes that are not valid? I am a Guyanese. I don't care who win or I don't care who lose. But my take is the president should be declared the winner on votes that are valid and not votes that are not valid. And because of the statement that was made by the CARICOM, reasonable, credible, it tells me that there were discrepancy. And I agree.
But no, ma'am, I'm going to go to the panel, but no one is not saying, including CARICOM, that there weren't discrepancies but to invalidate 115,000 votes. That is at the epicenter of the argument. Panel, Mr. Gouveia or Mr. Perreira?
First of all, I will take with a pinch of salt what Peter said earlier, because the context is important. Peter said, you know, like what I was saying is a cop-out. No, it's not. Peter, with all due respect to him, Peter is a pollster. He's not a political activist, right? I'm interested in the real politics on the ground. Now, the APNU-AFC declared victory. They did. In the recount, it shows something different. So, how do Mr. Granger and the leaders of APNU, after having declared victory earlier, go back to their supporters and tell them they've lost? What I'm interested in is this, is that as one who's on the ground in the communities, there is a legitimate fear. There's a legitimate fear on the part of African Guyanese, a fear of the PPP returning. There's a legitimate fear. That is it. That is there.
But if,
so
if it's the will of the people, it has to be accepted. The voice of the people is the voice of God.
I am not always sure if I don't know, that is a Protestant theological thing about the voice, Calvin, and the voice of the people. I will get into that. But this is what I want to say. Right? That a lot of people on the ground are not interested in what you are raising. The realities on the ground is that there's a fear that if the PPP return, there will be the days of the Phantom Squad, extrajudicial killings and so. Now, I know dynamics change, and I know given what is the type of leadership we have now at this stage in CARICOM and so, I don't know if it is possible for them to return to those days. But what I'm saying is there's a legitimate... Good?
We take your point about legitimate. So just your thoughts, Mr. Gouveia. Let's hear you.
Mr. Wickham and others cannot wish that away. So I am saying...
No, I agree with you.
If the APNU-AFC concede tomorrow that they accept that the PPP won the elections, which so far in the recount shows, then they are going to be stuck between a rock and a hard place. How do they go back to their supporters and tell them they lost the elections?
Okay. Point taken. Let's hear from Mr. Gouveia. Mr. Gouveia, your point?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to tell you that what is at stake here is honesty. There's a tremendous amount of dishonesty and a lack of integrity and a lack of decency. The compliance with the principles of democracy should be the underlying foundation of our country. And so I want to first of all tell you that is what is at stake in Guyana. There's a lot of dishonesty, a lot of scampishness and lying, and it's blatantly disrespectful to decent-minded people, the lying and disrespect that is going on. The first thing, I want to come back to something that Gerald talked about race. I'm a Portuguese. And I want to tell you, I looked at both of these parties during the elections, and I see a tremendous amount of Indian supporters in the PNC with the APNU, and I see a tremendous amount of Afro-Guyanese in the PPP. So the fact remains is that both of these parties over the years have grown into attracting Guyanese of all races. And so I do not believe that today race was a deciding factor in these elections. No longer one race by itself could dominate our elections. For the PPP to have won the elections, they had to have a tremendous amount of crossover votes. And even for the APNU to have the number of votes that they've had, 217,000 votes, they also had to have a tremendous amount of crossover votes. And so...
Okay, just hold your thoughts a second. We have a call on the line. Just hold your thoughts. We have a call on the line. Good evening, you're on the People's Business Live.
Hello, good evening to you and your panel.
Good evening.
I have two questions. I'd be grateful if I could get to
quickly go ahead.
One,
go ahead.
I'm speaking to Mr. Nandlall. I'm asking him. The question is, if they had an agreement with President Ranger and Mr. Jagdeo, and it's four part. They signed to that four-part agreement. Why is it when the whole scenario finished, the whole counting is finished, why is it the PPP only want to deal with one part and not the next three parts? Why is it it's only the ballots count in the box they're dealing with and they don't want to deal with the next three part of the agreement? There is one question. Two, why is it in the constitution it have the appeal court is the final court for the electoral process? It's also in the CCJ report, constitution. Why is it the PPP jumped the appeal court ruling and gone to the CCJ court? That is a blatant slap into our Guyanese and our court judicial. Because
Okay,
in
ma'am.
Jagdeo, he signed in 2004 September, he signed this agreement with the CCJ, and today he wanted to break that same rule and that same law. I would like Mr. Nandlall to explain that to me.
Okay, Mr. Nandlall, I think the last one is pretty clear that you can answer, because if it goes before the local court of appeal in Guyana and then it has to be challenged again, you take it one time to the CCJ rather than waste time going through the local court of appeal there.
But my friend, it shows the level of ignorance is a harsh word, but it shows the level of misinformation that these people have been fed. Listen to my friend, Perreira. He says, how does Granger go back and tell his supporters that he won the elections, that he lost the elections when he told him that he won the election? Why did he tell him that he won the elections when he know that he lost the elections on elections night? We are all practicing politicians. We knew, the PPP knew, we knew when we we lost the 2015 elections, the very night of the elections, because you get the statements of poll from your agents, and by the time the next morning, by the time sunrise, you tabulate them and you know what the results of the election. Granger must have known that, the PNC must have known that. Yet they go around telling people that they won the elections. That's the first thing. Secondly, this race thing is very, very unfortunate, and it's an exploited issue that APNU runs around the Caribbean and in Guyana speaking about. Absolute nonsense. We, the People's Progressive Party, has won seats in almost every region in Guyana. We won Region 9, a seat in Region 9. The only seat in Region 9. Indian people don't live there. Amerindians live there. We wanted a seat in Region 1. Indians don't live there. Amerindians live there. We won 4 seats in Region 4. 3 seats out of 7 in Region 4. We have more Afro-Guyanese in our party and as our party supporters than the other side have Indo-Guyanese. We have more Amerindians supporting the PPP than supporting any other party in this country. Yet we are accused of being, of one race. Absolutely unfortunate. But it's the only card that they can play.
Okay, hold your thoughts. We're going to come back to this. Just hold your thoughts. We're going to come back after the break on the People's Business Line. Welcome back to the People's Business Live, and we are going to go straight to the phone lines. Good evening, you are on the People's Business Live.
Hello, good night.
Good night, go ahead, ma'am. Thanks for calling. Don't listen to your television, just pose your question, please.
Yes. Why is yes?
Ma'am, answer
Yes.
the question,
Good
please.
evening. Why is it Mr. Nandlall did not answer the first woman question, and why is it he did not answer the second woman question?
Okay, no problem, Mr. Nandlall.
The first
I think that was the issue of reasonable and credible votes.
I don't know that CARICOM said that. Reasonable, credible. I don't know those. I can't remember the exact permutation of the words. But what I know that CARICOM, the main tenor of CARICOM's statements were that the elections were credible and free and fair, and the election results should be declared based upon the recount process. I know the CARICOM report spoke to the allegations that were being made in these workstations and dismissed all of them. In fact, if you want me to read, if the caller wants me to read a few excerpts from the CARICOM report, it says, "We are of the unshakable belief that the people of Guyana expressed their will at the ballot box. And as a result, the three-person CARICOM observer team concludes that the recount results are completely acceptable." Let me read another section. "Despite our concerns, nothing that we witness warrants a challenge to the inescapable conclusion that the recount results are acceptable and should constitute the basis of the declaration of the results of the March 2nd election. Any aggrieved political party has been afforded the right to seek redress before the court in the form of an election petition." That's what the CARICOM report says. I don't know what
Okay,
the
and
ladies asking.
just on Friday, when Prime Minister Motley handed over to the new chair, Mr. Gonzalez, Prime Minister Gonzalez, the Secretary General Irvin LaRoque, he stressed that each action taken by CARICOM to help resolve Ghana's election crisis was, and I quote, "by invitation and in an attempt to maintain the regional grouping's reputation as a bastion of democracy." We're going to go to the phone lines again. Good evening, you are on the People's Business Live.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening. Go ahead, ma'am. The ladies are calling this evening.
Yeah, I want to ask
We can hear you loud and clear.
And you know they're calling for me, right?
Hello?
Okay, no problem. Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
That's a good thing.
Right. I want to ask two questions. One, why is it that since an election is being held, that President Ranger still is holding on to power? Isn't it law that if an election is being held, that there should not be a president in power, one? And two, is there an age as to where a person can hold on to presidency? Isn't he too old to be running for president at this stage?
I'll let the panel answer that.
Let me answer that quickly for you. No, there is no age limit. Once you're 18 years and over, you are eligible under the Constitution of Guyana. And secondly, a president remains in office until another president assumes that office. So until the declaration of the results and another president is declared to have been elected, unfortunately, Mr. Granger remains there as a squatter because he has lost the elections.
Okay, panel, what's the way out of this mess? Can anyone hazard a thought? Some people have said that there should be new elections, but if you have new elections, does it seem likely that you would have perhaps the same results if you have the same people in place?
Well, I mean, let me just go first. I don't think that you can have new elections because new elections would require a new set of people to be sworn in. You would need to have a new elections commission. I really do not think that anyone would want to see the same election commission administer another election. You would need to have new officers, the chief elections officer, the returning officer. All of these people would have to be changed. And to me, the length of time that would take is not reasonable to assume it could be done within a 5-year span. So I think the way forward is that the commission has to push this issue. They have to get the results declared, and they have to swear in a new president. That to me is the way. I think the more important issue is how are you going to get Lewingfield to act? And I think that really is the bigger challenge, because I do believe that even after the CCJ rules, one way or the other, you're going to have a challenge getting him to act and to essentially declare the result that would allow the commission to make their necessary declaration of the winner. And that, to me, is the part that I'm worried about. I am really not sure, and I believe it may come to a situation where he either has to be suspended, his services have to be terminated, or, as I said, he has to be incarcerated, as was done in Trinidad and Tobago when they placed the speaker under house arrest in order to have her removed. I think that it may very well come to that, because I honestly do not think he has any intention of changing his mind regarding who he believes won the election.
Okay, that's all your thoughts, Peter. We have another call on the line. Good evening. You are on the People's Business Live.
Yes, sir. Good night. I am a Guyanese, and I'm living in Barbados, and I was following this election from ever since. And we, the Guyanese people, we need valid votes to declare a president. We don't need invalid votes to declare a president. We need valid votes. And everything that I was seeing, there were a lot of invalid votes. And the CEO of GCOM, he had the right to invalidate those votes because they had no statutory thing to confirm. And those are invalid votes.
But you realize, Mr. Nandlall, that the APNU-AFC has done an excellent job of essentially occupying a space where they have been able to define and redefine the question of validity and place it squarely in the hands of this one person. And I find it fascinating how all across the region, people who support the APNU-AFC have decided that invalidity is now determined in a way that is different. I see invalidity determined in terms of Barbados. And it is fascinating that these issues don't come up. But all of a sudden, invalidity can only be defined by one person in the case of Guyana. You have your hands full, sir.
I know. My brother,
Okay,
when the no confidence motion was passed against them, they got a court, the Court of Appeal of Guyana, to rule that 33 is not a majority of 65. Yeah. And they had the entire country talking that language, confusing all the school children with their arithmetic and mathematics.
Okay,
so you're seeing
another
manifestation here.
No problem. Hold your thoughts, Mr. Nandlall. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be back with the People's Business Live in just a moment. Welcome back to the People's Business Live as we continue to discuss the results of the elections in Guyana, and we are going to go straight to the phone lines. We have another caller on the line. Good evening. You are on the People's Business Live.
Yes, sir. I think that tonight's debate is too one-sided. We know what Wickham stand for. We know what mandate stand for. And I think it should be an even balance. And to be discussing it just before it goes before the court, when it's already before the court, it is very not fair. It's awkward. And I think that what has happened is that Peter Wickham and Mandel has more say than the person who giving the other party story. And it's unfortunate.
Well, the APNU-AFC was contacted by the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation and asked for representation over several days, and up to 6 o'clock this evening. Even we were keeping hoping that they would come. Then they told us that they weren't coming. We have to accept that. But they were given their side.
But, Mr. Moderator, the entire world is speaking the same language that myself and Mr. Wickham and Mr. Perreira are speaking. Gouveia, sorry. We are not in. We are in the majority. We are not in the minority. We can only speak the truth. We can only speak what we see, what we have observed, and what we have been part of. It's as simple as that.
I think the other point I want to get in here, though, is that I don't have a horse in this race. Particularly, I'm not Guyanese. I'm a political consultant, and I can tell you without reservation, I've never worked for the PPP Civic. So Mr. Nandlall knows that, because he would have never seen me in any of their offices. So I am really not in a situation where I believe I have a horse in this race. I am in here because objectively, I'm concerned about what's happening in terms of democracy in my region, and that's the perspective from which I'm speaking. So I hear this one-sidedness argument all the time, but the reality is that this issue is lopsided largely because the vast majority of people who are thinking about the issue are of the opinion of myself and Mr. Nandlall and also Mr. Gouveia. That's just the reality of the way it is. All across the region where we have these conversations, it's the same complaint, but you're not able to get APNU people to speak other than on a forum with APNU people alone because they don't want to be challenged.
Okay, just hold your thoughts. We have another call on the line. Good evening. You are on the People's Business Line.
Good evening, and good evening to your panel. This is for Mr. Nandlall, and this question is for Mr. Nandlall. He would have said to the Guyanese people that valid votes are valid votes. Fraud is fraud. When you go to court and you talk about a marriage, you talk about a legal marriage. When you go to court and you talk about a child, you talk about a legitimate child. Now he's sitting there and talking to the Barbados people and telling them that the Granger government did this and did that and did the fraud and do all these different things. And for me, the panel is one-sided. As much as somebody from Granger Party did not come in to play a part, but the panel has always been one-sided. And the PPP government, as always wanted, when they were in government in 2005 and up to 2015 before the election, it was always their laws. Their laws were always their laws and no one else's laws. Now it's the other way around. They're blaming everyone. They get the OAS, they get everybody to be on their side. But the PPP has been rigging elections for years.
Okay, we have calls, and let me restate again publicly that the APNU-AFC was invited to take part in this discussion, and CBC cannot be held accountable for their opting out.
Sir, the history of Guyana will show to any objective reader or researcher that one party has rigged elections in this country from 1968 to 1992, and they are now trying to rig again, and that is the PNC. Secondly, I don't resile from any of the pronouncements that I have made. Valid votes mean valid votes, and it's only valid votes that were counted. There is a presumption of validity. That presumption can only be rebutted by a court of law presented with an election petition. That is the law of the Caribbean. That's the law of the Commonwealth. That's the law of Guyana. It's nothing novel.
Okay. We have another call on the line. Good evening. You are on the People's Business Line.
Good evening, sir. I am not Guyanese, but I was made to understand through a statement by the known president and who will be sworn in as president sometime this week, that there are 750,000 residents in Guyana. And 600...
who will be sworn in as president this week?
Sorry?
Who will be sworn in as president this week?
The incumbent. Ranger.
Yeah, you have a crystal ball?
I don't have the crystal ball. The facts are there. There are 750,000 residents in Guyana. 651,000 people vote. There are 250,000 school children. Tell me if that is not mass fraud.
So the total number of votes cast at elections was 460 something thousand. These people are so uninformed. I don't understand where they're getting their information from. They attempt to read nothing. They just listen to the poison on truth that is emanating from the Granger camp. That's all they're doing.
Listen, Anil, the other point that has to be made that the last elections we had in Barbados, there were 255,000 people registered. Our population is estimated to be in the vicinity of 260 or thereabouts. So we have the same challenge. The list is bloated, and nobody is running from that. But there's obviously been an effort here to suggest that a bloated list is an indication of voter fraud in some way. And not only that, it's an indication of voter fraud, but you did it. The PPP did this thing. And I'm fascinated because no one ever, that gentleman is from Barbados, but he has not raised the fact that you have a similar situation in Barbados.
Yeah, you see, once you have continuous
but no one challenged our
registration,
result.
once you have the continuous single registration system, you will have bloated throughout the Caribbean. Anywhere that the continuous registration system is in place, you will have bloated lists because there is not an effective removal when people are dying, when people are dead, and also many of our laws allow you to travel, live overseas, but be able to vote in your country. So you cannot remove. Residency is not a basis for removal from the voters list or the national register. That's a law. That's
okay, I want to hear from Mr. Gouveia, the chairman of the Private Sector Commission. If this continues to drag out, what are the implications for Ghana? Mr. Gouveia, can we hear you? We're not hearing you. Yeah, I don't think I'm hearing loud and clear. I was trying to find out what are the implications for Guyana. Okay, Mr. Perreira, can you give us your thoughts if this drags on?
I would like to clear up some things quickly here, because Gerry defined himself. Gerry said he's Portuguese. Now, if you listen, if you pay attention, you know my name Perreira. That's a Portuguese name. I am Portuguese and African, but I don't have never had an identity problem. I'm African, period. So, but what, listening to Gerry, I don't know if he's trying to insinuate that May or the OVP will try to be dishonest or so in the position we take. Now, I am a regular contributor to the letter pages of all the national newspapers. And our position is clear, very clear. We have never batted for APNU-AFC or batted for the PPP. And I think it is time that the small parties, we cannot allow the national narrative to be dominated by these two parties, because there's a tendency that if you criticize APNU, you're PPP. And if you say anything about PPP, you're APNU. This type of absurd dialectic we have to transcend and go beyond. So we're not going to be trapped in there. Mr. Wickham should know that when the AFC contested the local government elections in 72, I think they contested 72 neighborhood democratic councils, and they did not win one seat. That should have been a wake-up call to APNU-AFC. That should have been a wake-up call. And I just want to make this clear.
Just all your thoughts. You're going to take a short break. We'll be back with the final segment of the People's Business Live in just a moment. Welcome back to the People's Business Live, the final segment. Mr. Gouveia, I was asking you what are the implications for Guyana if this situation continues to drag out?
We could actually see a massive collapse of our economy at the moment. And the point I want to make is that the entire world is speaking with one voice, and the only people that are not speaking with that voice, that is against that voice, is the APNU and their leaders. And that is unfortunate, because I wanted to say to you, I heard people come on this call and talk about valid votes. I was there throughout this process, and only valid votes were counted. All of these votes were valid votes. And while we were in the recount and we opened the ballot box, a valid vote could have become an invalid vote if the ballot was damaged, or if the actual X on the ballot paper was not put in an identifiable way. But that is the only way that valid votes were deemed to be valid during the recount, and it was deemed to be valid during the actual election day. And I think Anil made the point that we all knew, everybody in Guyana knew who won these elections by about the 3rd of March. And it's very unfortunate that we are here today, and I want to re-emphasize this. There have been a lot of lying to the supporters of APNU. They are lying every day. They're telling their people they won the elections. They're misinforming their people. And it's really a terrible thing for the Caribbean. I want to tell you that if this kind of election fraud is allowed to succeed in Guyana, you're going to get a lot of copycats in the Caribbean. We need to make sure this never happen in Guyana.
Okay, no problem. We have another call on the line. Good evening. You are on the People's Business Live. Good evening. Okay, I don't get that call. The election campaign, from what we heard, was dominated by how to use the windfall from the oil finds, which could put Guyana, from what we have heard, among the top 10 oil producers in the world, with production in the offshore oil fields estimated to contain at least 8 billion barrels starting last year. Is this really the overarching issue at stake in Guyana for these political parties? This how to use the windfall from the oil monies?
I don't believe so myself from the private sector. I believe this is about power. I think this is unfortunately have always been a grab for power, and this has always been a disrespect for the rule of law and democracy. This is not about oil. Oil is just a byproduct of this. And people who keep saying that we are having these election problems because of oil is not true. We are having this because they're dishonest people who are trying to grab power, and they should allow the principles of democracy to prevail.
I want to come into.
Call on the line. Just Mr. Hold your thoughts, Sam. We have another call on the line.
Yes, am I on?
Go ahead.
Am I on?
You are on. Go ahead, please.
Okay. I think that the problem in Guyana is the racist disposition which has consumed our politics since independence. And they are not talking about it. And the gentleman, one of them especially, who is there, himself, on one occasion, identified part of that problem by saying to another that the Chatri is a different class in that country. And that was when he was speaking about the issue of the bombing of a newspaper. He was conveying that information when he had the authority to deal with it. What combined with the racism, combined with the inequalities and the corruption is what has come to a head today. They don't want to face it.
Do you have a question, sir? Do you have a question for panel?
The question I have is, why is it that they are not able to speak with their own people about coming to terms with this issue of corruption and racism and the inequality which has been bred into the society? People are not going to take it anymore. They've been actually killing black people in that country.
Okay, thank you very much for your question. Mr. Nandlall, Nandlall, before the break, you were wanting to respond to the issue of the oil first?
Yeah, I wanted to agree with Mr. Gerry Gouveia to say that the APNU, which is really controlled by the PNC, is a party with a long history of authoritarianism and political dictatorship. The whole Caribbean knows about Forbes Burnham. They rigged every elections from 1968, 1973, 1980, 1985. It's only when when we welcomed international observers and we had reforms to our electoral system that we had free and fair elections for the first time in 1992, since after independence. And then after that, we had our elections observed by every major international organization observing elections in this hemisphere. And each of those elections were certified to be free and fair. So I don't. It is, and you had about 3 elections: 92 elections, 97 elections, 2001 elections, where the APNU, again, their name was PNC at that time, refused to accept the results. Results that were certified by the whole world to be free and fair, and the elections were certified to be transparent by all the observer teams. Yet they burned, they beat, they looted in the streets of Georgetown for weeks and months. We had to have an intervention, if you can remember, in 1997, another intervention from CARICOM, and we gave up 2 years of governance simply because and went to constitutional reform. And they still couldn't win an election. Now, they won the 2015 election, they performed miserably, they neglected all their promises in their manifesto, they neglected their constituency, they engaged in massive corruption, discrimination. They lost the election and now they're blaming the whole world.
Okay,
and
as the time goes on,
I don't wish to reply to that guy just now who said a lot of nonsense he was talking about.
The U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has hinted at possible sanctions. Does Ghana, if the state status quo remains, risk becoming an international pariah?
Let me say this to you, that Guyana is sitting next to Venezuela, and Venezuela at the moment is really a state that is challenged by all of the issues of international legitimacy and so on. And if Guyana, sitting in the Caribbean, end up becoming just like that, where our government lacks legitimacy, we will undermine regional security in the Caribbean. It is vitally important that all of the countries in the Caribbean embrace legitimacy, that enjoys the legitimacy from the international community. And so it is vitally important for us. If we do not get a legitimate government in place, we have not had 1 cent of aid to help the businesses and people out of jobs, to help put stimulus packages into jobs. And so the COVID crisis is wreaking havoc in Guyana because we are not getting 1 penny of aid from any international organization. And so if we continue along this line, however long it is happening, the people, the ordinary people in our country, is suffering. They are without any kind of assistance.
Okay, Captain Gouveia, time is coming upon us, so I'm going to give each of you 30 seconds to wrap up and leave your final thoughts with the people of Barbados. Mr. Anil Nandlall, you go first.
Yes, please. Well, we are in a crisis, and it is all because a grouping of political leaders have refused to comply with our electoral process. They have trampled upon the rule of law. They have trampled upon our legal system. They have trampled upon the electoral system. They have trampled upon democracy, and they are holding on to power although they have lost elections. Hopefully, we have, after 4 months, we will see the end of this saga, and the declaration of the results will come, and hopefully they vacate office. I don't know, I may be too optimistic, but and they're using this issue of race. We have a multi-party, multiracial party in our country. In the Indian population is about 38%. We got 54% of the votes. How is it that we are, Indo-based? We had massive support from right across the ethnic divide in this country. But that's the only card that they're left with in the pack. So they're playing it all around the Caribbean.
The final thoughts of Mr. Anil Nandlall of the PPP Civic Party and former AG. Final thoughts, Mr. Perreira, 30 seconds.
I I listened to Gerry, and Gerry keep speaking. I heard it, speaking about democracy, and so was Anil, and democracy and democracy. But we leave that aside for another program because that's a highly contested term and concept. He spoke of the PNC and being authoritarian and so many years of Burnham's authoritarian rule. There was sickening authoritarian rule by the PPP when Jacques Bio assumed the presidency until the PPP debated office. That cannot be denied. What we have here is two political leviathans competing for power, to put their hands on the oil resources, not for real and genuine transformation of this country, but to compete to show who is better at managing it. Not for the people, but for their cronies, friends, and families.
Okay, final thoughts there of Mr. Perreira of the Organization for the Victory of the People. Your final thoughts, Captain Gouveia, the chairman of the Private Sector Commission.
This elections was not about race. If you were in Guyana and looked at the political campaigns, you would have seen both parties. They ran first class, first world campaigns across this country. Both parties talk about being in the big tent. Both parties had Guyanese of all races, and there were Guyanese of Indo, Portuguese, Amerindians in the APNU. And so to hear now people are saying, oh, this is because this is a African guy. That's nonsense. There was no race in this campaign. The race is now being inserted by the losers.
Okay, thank you very much. The final thoughts, Mr. Peter Wickham, are yours.
Yeah, no, these are not the best of times for the Caribbean. I believe that these are the worst of times. We are facing COVID crisis, which is unprecedented. We are facing the collapse of LIAT, which is tragic. We are also facing an unprecedented electoral crisis in Guyana, from which I think the region needs to learn. I do hope that very soon we see an end to this. I think it is important for our Guyanese brothers and sisters to know that we stand with them side by side in terms of ensuring that we bring a certain level of democracy to this region. And I want to essentially just leave them with this message. These are not the best of times, but I do feel that as other times in the past, the region has been able to weather the storm. We can do the same thing now.
Okay, thank you very much. This week we discussed the disputed election results in Guyana with our esteemed panel. I want to thank them. And I also want to thank members of the public who called in. And you can join us again next week for another edition of the People's Business Live.